Hamlet. Is there anything really to say about this play? It is the best-known play in the world. It contains the single most quoted line in literature of all time. To be or... I have had tuk-tuk drivers in Bangkok, train porters in Jammu, Kashmir, India, quote that line to me when they find out I teach Shakespeare. Someone once said, and I don't know if it's true, that if you take everything that has been published on this play, every article, every book, every review, and put them on a timeline evenly spaced, beginning of the timeline in 1601 when this play was first performed, something has been written about this play every 15 minutes since it was first put on stage. Now, I don't know if that's true, but it feels true. And if you do a deep dive into Hamlet criticism, you will never come back to the surface. You will drown. There is so much. So how to approach this play? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a very, very short summary of the action of the play. Very short. Then I want to talk about how this play became so incredibly important, how it became the best-known play in the world. I want also to talk about the big question that always comes up when people discuss this play, and that's the question of madness in the play. And from there, I want to talk about a variety of other themes and issues that the play talks about, and then, if we have time, I want to talk about this production, which I saw last night. So that's the plan. So let's start with a summary of the play. And the play is a little tricky because there's actually a pre-story so that we find out afterwards. But the pre-story is this. Hamlet is the Prince of Denmark, and he's away in Germany studying at university, the University of Wittenberg. That's an interesting university. It was famous in Shakespeare's time for two reasons. First of all, it was the jumping off spot of the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther posted the 95 Theses on a wall in Wittenberg and questioning doctrines of the Catholic Church, and this started a Reformation, a new religion, which would tear Europe apart. And England, of course, ended up on the Protestant side. The second reason Wittenberg would have been known to Shakespeare's audience is because Shakespeare's contemporary and perhaps collaborator, Christopher Marlowe, wrote a play called Dr. Faustus. Dr. Faustus, the scholar who sells his soul to the devil, and it's set in Wittenberg. So, interesting choice. Hamlet is off being a student. He gets news that his father, conveniently also called Hamlet, we'll call him Old Hamlet, the King of Denmark has died. So Hamlet goes back to see the funeral, sees the funeral, and then shortly thereafter, Hamlet's mother, the Queen, Gertrude, marries Hamlet's uncle, Old Hamlet's brother Claudius, a man Hamlet despises. And so Hamlet goes into this funk. He refuses to take off his mourning clothes while everyone else is dressed in wedding finery. And that's all before the action of the play. The play starts with a ghost. This ghost is seen by a couple of people, including Hamlet's friend Horatio. Horatio says, Hamlet, you've got to see this thing. So Hamlet sees the ghost and talks to it. And the ghost says, I am the ghost of your father. I am Old Hamlet. And my death was not, as people have told, an accident. I was murdered. I was poisoned by Claudius, my brother, right, who now sleeps, this incestuous, adulterous beast, sleeps with my Gertrude. Revenge me. And Hamlet says, absolutely, I will sweep to my revenge. And he doesn't. Instead, we get this weird scene where he grabs his friends who have seen the ghost and makes them promise they won't say anything about this. And then he tells them this. This is what he says. He says, if here as before, never so help you mercy, how strange or odd sometimes I bear myself, as I perchance hereafter shall think meet to put an antic disposition on. To put on an antic disposition. So what he's saying is, guys, I'm going to start acting wacky, antic, and you can't say anything. What? Why would you make this decision? This is what he does. He begins to act mad. And his madness is, as I'll just talk about later, kind of contrived, kind of theatrical. He makes puns. He pretends he doesn't understand what people are saying. He insults people. He has logic games that he plays with people. Sometimes he gets emotionally overwrought, but for the most time, he's just frustrating people with bizarre, absurd statements. And the person he teases the most is Polonius. And Polonius is the father of Ophelia, Hamlet's girlfriend. Polonius thinks, Hamlet is mad for love. I will make sure that Ophelia can never speaks to him again, just rejects his advances, right, to keep her safe. But maybe this will also drive Hamlet more mad. So Polonius brings this theory to the king and the queen, and they're thinking about this. Meanwhile, Hamlet, he's beginning to worry about that ghost. What if the ghost didn't tell the truth? And there was good reason in the 16th century, in the Elizabethan period, to be wary of what a ghost told you. I mean, just between you and I, don't trust a ghost, okay? The ghosts were theologically suspect. Catholics believed that it was possible there were ghosts. They were the souls of people in purgatory that would come back and ask you to pray for them so they could get out of purgatory and get into heaven. They don't come out of purgatory and say, hey, kill somebody. Protestants said if you saw a ghost, it was a demon in disguise tempting you. And Horatio actually raises that possibility. So Hamlet has some doubts about this ghost. So he says, okay, I'm going to test the theory. A traveling troupe of actors come to the Elsinore, and so Hamlet has this idea. He gets them to play an old tragedy, the tragedy of Gonzago, but he inserts some material that replicates the murder of old Hamlet. What if we play this in front of Claudius? Claudius, if he freaks out, then I know he's guilty. Right? If he doesn't freak out, he's innocent. So they do this. They put on the play. There's a replication of the murder of old Hamlet, and Claudius freaks out, runs out of the theater, runs out of the room. Hamlet is overjoyed. The ghost was telling the truth. Now, revenge. And so he runs after Claudius, finds Claudius alone, unguarded, on his knees praying, and doesn't kill him. Sneaks up behind him and says, he's praying. He might go to heaven. If I stab him when he's praying, he'll go to heaven. I'll wait till he's drunk. Then I'll stab him. Instead, I'll go berate my mother. So he then runs off and confronts his mother and chews her out for having married Claudius in the first place. And they have this really big emotional scene. Unfortunately, Polonius is hiding in the same room, eavesdropping on this conversation. Hamlet realizes someone's in the room. He doesn't know who it is. He stabs through the curtain and kills Polonius. Yeah. To put it mildly, there are consequences. One consequence, Ophelia, Polonius' daughter, goes mad. She goes insane. She loses it entirely. And eventually, she drowns. She falls into a brook either through suicide or because she is so mad, she doesn't know how to save herself. And she dies. Another consequence, Ophelia's brother, Polonius' son, Laertes, who's been away in France, he comes roaring back home looking for revenge. And when he finds out that it was Hamlet that killed his father. He is ready to kill Hamlet on the spot. Another consequence, Claudius is sick of Hamlet and had been planning to send him off to England for a while. Now that's it. He's going to England. So he takes Hamlet, puts him on a boat, sends him to England with two companions, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who are childhood friends of Hamlet's. He gives this is Claudius, he gives Rosencrantz and Guildenstern a letter to give to the King of England when they arrive. And the letter says, "Dear King, kill Hamlet. Thank you, Claudius." During the sea voyage across that vast English channel, Hamlet finds this letter, destroys it, and forges another one. Slips into Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's packet. And this letter says, "Dear King, kill Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Your BFF, Claudius." Then Hamlet manages to get onto a passing pirate ship and make it back to Denmark, where he encounters Horatio. They have a conversation with a gravedigger. You can guess where I'm standing right now on this platform. And then he witnesses the funeral of Ophelia. He didn't know she died. And he loses it. He just becomes emotionally overwrought, and he creates a terrible scene, and he gets into a tussle with Laertes. After that, though, he seems to be purged. He no longer pretends to be mad. He no longer makes stupid jokes. He no longer does, insults people. He becomes princely in his demeanor. But that's not good enough for Claudius and Laertes. They plan to kill him. So they come up with a device. They'll have Laertes and Hamlet have a fencing duel. They'll do fencing, popular sport in the Elizabethan period. So they're going to have a little fencing match. But Laertes' sword will be poisoned. And, just in case that's not good enough, we'll leave a cup of poisoned wine. So when Hamlet gets thirsty, he'll grab that. So the duel, the fencing contest goes ahead, and it doesn't go according to plans. Hamlet gets stabbed with a poisoned sword, so does Laertes. Gertrude drinks the wine. Right? When Hamlet figures out what's going on, he stabs Claudius with the poisoned sword and makes him drink the rest of the wine. Everyone dies. But Hamlet, because he's in the title of the play, gets to die last. And as he's dying in Horatio's arms, he, for the first time, starts thinking about politics. He says, who should be king of Denmark? Fortinbras. Fortinbras? Fortinbras is this Norwegian prince, this hothead who has been tramping around northern Europe with an army for the past couple of months. Give it to him? Then he dies. Guess who comes into the room? Fortinbras. Fortinbras looks around. What the? And Horatio says, "I will explain everything." But he doesn't, because the play ends. Now, thank you. That sounds pretty action-packed, right? There's all sorts of stuff going on there. But if you see the full version of this play, it's like 4.5 hours long. It is incredibly long. At one point, Hamlet's reading a book, and Polonius comes in and says, "What do you read, my lord?" And Hamlet says, "Words, words, words." That describes the play. And not just the play. The play exists in multiple versions. So there's more words than you even know. There are two big versions, the folio version and quarto 2, which are very long, about 1,000 words longer than the average Elizabethan play. And then there's another version called Q1, which is much shorter, much more condensed, much more playable, I think, but which critics have hated for centuries because it's not Hamlet-y enough. For example, Quarto 1, famous speech, goes like this: "To be or not to be, Aye, there's the point. To die, to sleep, is that all? Yeah, aye, all. Well, no, to sleep, to dream, aye, Mary, there it goes. So, critics have not liked that version. The play was, however it was performed back in 1601, we don't know which version was performed, was popular in its time. But what's interesting is, when people wrote about this play, when people talked about this play back then, in the 17th century, the stuff they remembered about the play was not the philosophical Hamlet, was not those great speeches of introspection, was not the melancholy, was not even the scene of him holding the skull in the graveyard. No, what they remarked on were the goofy scenes, the scenes where Hamlet is teasing Polonius, when he's playing all these games with people. That's what the audience at the time really liked. They liked the funnier stuff. How did that change? How did Hamlet become Hamlet-y? We have to jump ahead and to the 18th century and blame it on my great arch enemies, the Romantics. The Romantics, for those of you not familiar, this is a movement in the arts of poets and visual artists and philosophers and thinkers who rejected the optimism and fetishism of reason which dominated that period known as the Enlightenment. They said, no. It's not about reason, it's about transcendence. It's about spirituality. It's about finding another dimension through art. It's about nature. It's about innocence. And some of us, we artists, are born with special sensibilities that can channel this. We're more sensitive. We're more imaginative. We feel deeper than normal human beings. And of course, to some that makes us outsiders, marginalized. So we stand in our corners, commenting on the world which is too vulgar for us to participate in. And they looked at Hamlet and said, boom, there it is. The Romantic poet Lord Byron actually said, quote, "We love Hamlet as much as we love ourselves." To which I reply, Lord Hamlet, get a job. So they made Hamlet popular. And by the time you get into the 19th century, this play is considered the greatest of plays, the greatest of Shakespeare's plays by far. And the role of Hamlet is considered the Mount Everest for actors and some actresses. Everyone wants to play Hamlet. They don't even call it. It becomes so important to see, they just say this, I will be playing the Dane. So incredible in the 19th century. And then at the end of the 19th century, this play gets another boost from an unlikely source. Sigmund Freud, the inventor of psychoanalysis, had this theory about the Oedipal complex. The idea that at a certain point in a young boy's or a young man's psychosexual development, they get this sort of sexual yearning or obsession with their mothers and resent their fathers. And Freud specifically says, Hamlet is an example of a repressed Oedipal complex. Why does Hamlet hate Claudius so much? Because when old Hamlet died, Hamlet thought he had a chance with his mother, but Claudius came in. Now, we don't have to agree with this, but a lot of people in the early 20th century did. And so you started getting productions of this play and film versions of this play that have these Freudian ideas worked into them. Even Laurence Olivier's version of Hamlet. Laurence Olivier was profoundly affected by Freud's reading of this play. The third sort of thing that pushes this play and makes it so important and so talked about are the existential philosophers. Now, I don't want to go into that yet. I want to come back to existentialism later because it's a big thing to talk about on a Saturday morning. So let's just hold that off for a second. Instead, let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that is madness. The perennial question that critics asked about this play since the 18th century was, is Hamlet mad or is he just pretending to be? Oscar Wilde said, are the critics of Hamlet mad or are they just pretending to be? And so I'm going to give you an answer. I'm going to give you the definitive answer, the correct answer, which is, of course, mine. And the answer is this. No. He's not mad. He is he is pretending to be mad, and I think we can prove it in a variety of ways. First of all, Hamlet puts Ophelia in the play, and Ophelia really goes mad. Her madness is total disassociation, failure to recognize people, sometimes recognizing people, the inability to save herself physically. When you watch this production, when Ophelia walks in mad, oh my God, compare that to what Hamlet's been doing in the play, and you see this stark difference. Why else would Shakespeare have put that in that, but to emphasize it? The other thing about Hamlet's madness, and this ties to my big theme of the play, is the nature of Hamlet's madness. The first time we find out he's mad, we don't see it, we're told it. We're told it by Ophelia. Ophelia says to her father, Hamlet came to see me. He was all dressed weird. His stockings were falling down. And he said that he did this. He took me by the wrist and held me hard. Then he goes to the length of all his arm, and with his other hand thus o'er his brow, he falls to perusal of my face as I would draw it. Long stayed he so, and at last a little shaking of mine arm, and thrice his head thus waving up and down, he raised a sigh so piteous and profound, as it did seem to shatter all his bulk and end his being. This done, he lets me go, and with his head over his shoulder turned, he seems to find his way without his eyes. Okay. Deborah, could you come up here for a minute and be my Ophelia? No, you're not crazy. This is uncrazy Ophelia. Okay, so let's just do, okay, so you stand there, ready? Okay, ready? That was it. Okay. I mean, it's so corny. I mean, it's so dumb. It's so over theatrical. Now, why is he doing this? Why would he act mad? Why is it the first thing that comes into his head after he says, I'm going to sweep revenge? Well, here's my theory. Hamlet is a drama fan. He loves theater, loves drama. When the actors show up at Elsinore, he is overjoyed. He knows them by name. He jokes around with them, even though, I mean, he's a prince and they're just actors. And then he says to them, I heard thee speak me a speech once, but was never acted, or if it was, not above once. For the play I remember, please not the million. So he says, remember, I heard you do this speech. No one liked it, but I liked it. It never got performed, maybe once, never. And then he recites 10 to 15 lines of it from memory. That's a fanboy. Right? I mean, just loves this. And also, after the tragedy of Gonzago, after Claudius is frightened by the representation of the murder of old Hamlet, everyone goes off stage except Hamlet and Horatio. Hamlet is so happy, he begins to sing. And then he says to Horatio, would not this, sir, and a forest of feathers, if the rest of my fortunes turn Turk with 2 provincial roses on my raised shoes, get me a fellowship in a cry of players? That's hard to understand, but what he's saying is, I could be in theater. Did you see that? I could be an actor. Right, an actor. All right, so he's absolutely thrilled by this. So, theater is his rock and roll. It's his popular culture. And like a lot of teenagers who want to bug their parents, they use popular culture, their rock and roll or whatever it is, to drive their folks nuts. Play that music louder. Wear some weird clothes that go with it. Right? Drive the parents crazy. That's basically what he's doing. Theater is his way, his popular culture. I'll use theater to drive them crazy. And the role I'm going to play is the madman. Why the madman? Because, a couple of reasons. First of all, it's the most histrionic of roles, right? It's the most over the top. You can do anything if you're playing a madman. But also because of an earlier play. In 1589 or so, there was a play called The Spanish Tragedy that was performed. It was written by a man called Thomas Kidd. Some of you may have seen the stage production we did of it some years ago. This play, The Spanish Tragedy, was one of the most popular plays of this period. Much more popular than any play by Shakespeare. It was constantly printed and constantly revived. And when it was revived, extra scenes were written for it. And most of those extra scenes were more mad scenes. So let me briefly tell you the story of the Spanish Tragedy, because the whole play of Hamlet and our character Hamlet are really, in some ways, a reaction to this. Spanish Tragedy, very quickly, there's a man, Chief Justice of Spain, called Hieronymo. He has a son named Horatio, who is murdered. Hieronymo doesn't know who did it, and then later finds out it was the Prince of Spain and his friend. He can't get to them. The frustration drives him mad. He has these bouts of madness. His wife, Isabella, goes entirely mad and kills herself. Finally, Hieronymo figures out a way to get revenge, a play within a play. Okay. What he does is he has the prince and his friend perform in a play before the royal family, play that Hieronymo wrote and is going to act in. And in this play within a play, those two characters, the characters played by the Spanish prince and his friend, are supposed to get stabbed and die. Hieronymo really stabs them and kills them, while their family just look on and say, oh, my boy's good. You see the way he died? That was great. At the end, Hieronymo reveals what he did, stabs another person, bites out his own tongue, and then is killed. So that play started a fashion for mad characters, especially mad characters seeking justice. Hamlet is sort of a version of Hieronymo. Another thing about that play, it began a fashion for revenge tragedies. Revenge tragedies. And this became an incredibly popular dramatic genre, of which Hamlet is the most famous example. The revenge tragedy works like this. A crime is committed. There is no legal recourse for some reason to fix this crime. So the aggrieved person has to take justice into his own hands. However, there's an impediment. That for some reason, the revenger can't get to the criminal, can't find the criminal, doesn't know who the criminal is. There has to be an impediment, or else the play would be over Act 1, Scene 2. So you need an impediment. Eventually, the revenger will use ingenuity to get around that impediment and get to the enemies. He will kill the enemies, preferably publicly, because justice must be seen to be served, and then the revenger himself will die, because the playwrights do not want to advocate for vigilante justice. Now, it sounds like a silly plot line, except for the revenger dying. I've given you the plot line for every Liam Neeson movie ever made. So this plot line is still very much with us, all right? Hamlet is, in many ways, a reaction to that genre. But Shakespeare does something special, and something which is revolutionary, and the reason why this play is so important. Hamlet finds out about Claudius from the ghost when they're on the ramparts of the castle. He says, I will sweep to my revenge. What is the impediment? Claudius is downstairs getting drunk. Hamlet could walk down the stairs and stab him. Play is over Act 1, Scene 3 or so. Right? I mean, there's no impediment. He's the prince. No one's going to stop him from going up to the king. He has total access. He's a nobleman, so he's allowed to wear a sword. What is stopping Hamlet from taking revenge? The only thing that is stopping Hamlet from taking revenge is Hamlet. His own mind, his own conscience, his own sensitivity, his sensibilities, his melancholy, his guilt. And this is why Hamlet, the play, is revolutionary. Because what Shakespeare did is take the form of tragedy, which is about a bunch of events that crush characters, and said, no, the character is the event. This is a play about human subjectivity, about what the person goes through, about interiority, not what's going out there in the world. The final revenge of this play happens in 20 lines. It's just a cascade of accidents, right? The rest of the play is an exploration of the human mind. So Shakespeare makes human subjectivity, human interiority, a dramatic event for really, I think, the first time in Western drama. That's why this play is so revolutionary. Now, this brings me to the question of, I mentioned earlier, existentialism. Existentialist philosophers all disagree with each other because all philosophers disagree with each other. I know some philosophers. Never go out to lunch with a philosopher. Get in an argument about the menu. Is this really the menu, or is this just an image of the menu? Do these items on the menu signify? Anyway, the existentialist philosophers were united around one idea. And this is going to sound strange, but bear with me. Existence precedes essence. That's what existentialism means. Existence, a thing exists or doesn't exist, to be or not to be, precedes essence, to be something. Now, in religious traditions, people's essence was predetermined because God planned it all. But the existentialist says, no, blank slate. You define your essence after you come into existence through what you do, through your actions, through your decisions. And that's difficult to do very often because the world is absurd. You can choose to believe in it or not. It's up to you how you define yourself. And when you make an existential decision, and you hear that phrase used by journalists all the time, this is an existential crisis. What that means is this is a crisis that now will, or a decision that now will determine us, change our essence. Hamlet is in this situation where he has to act, but he doesn't know how. He is confused, and I think largely because Shakespeare goes out of his way to make the world of Hamlet, to make Elsinore infinitely confusing. Nothing is as it seems. How do I act? What decisions can I make in a world that I don't understand? A couple of examples. Appearances. Gertrude appeared to be a loving wife to old Hamlet, married Claudius. Claudius, when we first see him, appears to be a good king. He's not. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, childhood friends, they're spies. Right? Is this ghost really the ghost of old Hamlet, or is it a demon in disguise? Other little things. Ophelia's death. Ophelia dies, she falls into a creek, and she drowns. And that speech is delivered in this production really well. Well, okay, I won't go on to it, but it's the Queen describes exactly how Ophelia died. She was putting flowers in her hair, and she reached for this flower over a brook, and the branch broke, and she fell into the water, and she floated, and then eventually her clothes got filled with water, and they pulled her down. It's a speech about 20, 25 lines long. If you saw that happen, why didn't you help? You watched this, go, what? It's not clear. Other things are not clear. What is the religion of Elsinore? Hamlet goes to a Protestant university, but at one point he swears by St. Patrick. Old Hamlet seems to be in purgatory, which is a Catholic belief, not a Protestant, but the purgatory he describes sounds surprisingly like hell. What's going on there? And there's an emphasis in this play on damnation. I can't kill this horrible man because he's praying, and that'll send him to heaven. What? His life didn't count? It's just because he's praying? Old Hamlet was apparently a virtuous man, but he's in purgatory because he wasn't given time to confess. This is a brilliant life. It's just this technicality that's stopping him from getting into heaven. When Ophelia dies, and the funeral, Laertes is upset because there aren't more rites at the funeral. And the priest says, well, the matter of her death is doubtful. She may have been a suicide, so come on. The religion of this world seems to be legalistic. You didn't fill in the form properly, therefore you're going to hell. What's the nature of the politics in this play? Hamlet was the son of the king. Shouldn't he become the king? When old Hamlet dies, he says at one point, Claudius popped in the election. The election of the king? It's uncertain. And then, here's a big one. The old Hamlet says that Claudius and Gertrude are committing incest. And he's right. By the standards of the time, you could not marry your dead brother's wife. That was considered incest. Everyone in Shakespeare's audience would have known that because of Henry VIII. Henry VIII married his dead brother's wife, but he got papal dispensation to do so. The Pope had to say, okay, just this once, we'll sign off on it, okay. And then, when Henry decided, she's not giving me babies, obviously I shouldn't have married her, this is incest, this was wrong, I'll go back to the Pope and say, Pope, admit it, you were wrong, and let me get out of this marriage. And the Pope says, what? No. And so Henry begins the process of pulling the English church out of Catholicism because of this brother marrying the wife of a dead brother. So this is clearly incest, but no one notices it except the ghost in Hamlet. No one else says boo about it. Why not? So in a world like that, when you're told by a ghost to kill someone, how do you act? How do you define yourself? How do you make the right decision to become the person you want to be? This is Hamlet's dilemma. And this is why he struggles and why we watch him struggle and listen to him work it through in his mind for up to 4.5 hours. Okay, the last few minutes, let's talk a bit about this production. This production, a lot of what I've just said today, you can throw it out the window. Because this production is a radically shortened version, re-edited, rejigged. Absolutely fine with that. They do a couple of things, like we don't have traveling actors. We have traveling musicians. Instead of performing the death of old Hamlet, they sing the death of old Hamlet, which is an interesting decision. You'll also notice Ophelia, I don't know the name of the actress who plays Ophelia, but she is great. I think the best Ophelia I've ever seen. She's sort of in on Hamlet's madness from the beginning, so she's sort of complicit, which is another sort of interesting choice. So there are a variety of things that they do to sort of tighten up the play and move it along. A number of the longest speeches are cut, and the play begins, I shouldn't give it away, but you probably read the reviews anyway, it begins with to be or not to be speech. Get it out of the way. And fair enough, I've spoken to actors who said they hate that speech because it's a sing-along speech. It's one of those speeches in Shakespeare where as soon as you start it, people are going to be, not to be, in the audience, right? How do you make it original? How do you stop people from doing that? Well, here's one way. It's sort of like a rock band starting with their first greatest song right at the beginning. We'll do the greatest hit right off so they won't keep asking for it. Let's get it out of the way. But I think it's a very clever production and beautiful in terms of the set, the music, the lighting design, costumes. It's great. And also the duel at the end, lots of blood. I'm tired of bloodless fights. Fights you see on stage where, the sword goes under here, right? And someone goes, oh, I'm dead. No, but let's get some blood. The one thing I do miss, though, in this production is the opening line of Hamlet. The opening line of the play is, who's there? And it's spoken by one guard to another in the dark, shivering on the top of that castle. Who's there? It's a question about human identity. Who are you? Which is the central mystery of this play. Thank you. Thank you. So we have time for questions, and Mary, wherever Mary is, way up there.
Isn't it the case that Hamlet is mad? I mean, he's seeing ghosts, he's having a schizophrenic break, he's killing his friends, he's causing immense suffering to his best friends, and he's very confused about what his mother wants, especially in that scene after he almost kills Claudius, right? And then lastly, could you explain why the play has such a significance in the Francophone and Germanic worlds as well? Marx quotes Hamlet, as does Lacan. I'm just interested in why this play exploded across Western Europe. Thank you.
Okay, those are a lot of big questions. First of all, Hamlet's not the only one who sees the ghost, so the ghost is real. All right. And some of those other questions, I think he does become, as I mentioned, emotionally overwrought at certain points. He becomes overexcited. But again, compare the nature of his madness to Ophelia's, and I think no. Now, the Western Europe thing is interesting. Why was Marx interesting? Well, the Germans were crazy about Shakespeare. Crazy about Shakespeare. The first academic Shakespeare society in the world was a German one, not an English one. Even the Nazis liked Shakespeare. Hitler Youth had a Shakespeare week in their calendar, right? So there was that long tradition. Lacan, probably out of Freud. I mean, I would guess. I don't know a lot about Lacan, but he's probably in a reaction to the fact that Freud grabbed upon Shakespeare and grabbed upon, especially Hamlet, to illustrate some of his ideas. That would be my guess, but I don't know enough about Lacan. Okay, thank you.
I think you can look at madness not as an either-or, but as a continuum of experience, and that we can experience things that might be called mad at different points in our lives, depending on the circumstances that we're dealing with or where we're at in our lives. I don't think we have to look at it as either he's mad or he's not mad, but that he's a human being experiencing sometimes a little madness, sometimes what we would call normal, and particularly in grief. I think profound grief has elements of madness to it. It's a very difficult thing to go through, and a dissociative sometimes experience, and he is in that space. And I think that you can look at the play as an exploration of that, moving, having moments of quote unquote madness and times of lucidity. So I don't think we have to look at it as either mad or not mad, but as an experience, as a total experience of a human being.
Okay, that's very interesting. I think you're absolutely right, especially the grief. The scene in Ophelia, I think, is when Hamlet comes closest to absolutely losing it, and he's emotionally overwrought. But we have to remember two things. First of all, there's real madness in life, as you eloquently explained, but there's also madness on the stage, right? And on the stage, especially in the Elizabethan period, mad was mad. Right, there was a whole tradition. You can know as a character was mad as soon as they walked on stage, because there were certain costume things, the hose down, or if it's a woman, the hair undone. Right, so there was a whole series of signifiers to represent madness on stage, and Hamlet does it with this weird theatricality. But you're absolutely right. In real life, yes. On the stage, not so much.
Hi, just a question about Hamlet's relationship with Ophelia. When she dies, he says he loved her. When he says, "Get thee to a nunnery," do you think he's trying to save her, or what is his motivation in the way that he treats her at that point in the play?
I've seen this done so many different ways. There's no definitive answer. You have to make an interpretation of production. If Hamlet realizes that he's being spied on by Polonius and Claudius, then this is performance, right? And this is just going over the top. If it's not, like you'll see in this production, they move some of those scenes around, and it seems to be Hamlet honestly wanting to save Ophelia from this world, from Elsinore, from Denmark, which has become so corrupt and awful that she needs to save herself. So this is a decision the director or actor has to make. I don't think it's perfectly clear from the text that we have, from any of the versions of the text we have. I wish it was.
Could you talk a bit about the process of editing down a long play like Hamlet into a short production? If it were me, I'd be nervous to edit the greatest play ever made. So what do you consider to be a good edit? And talk a bit about that?
Well, excellent question. Fortunately, I'm not an editor. I have many friends who are. And there's a difference between scholarly editing and dramatic editing. Dramatic editing, you have to make a huge number of decisions. Mary knows this better than I do, about the cast you have, about the budget you have, about the set you have, about the timelines you have. And then you decide what you want to emphasize in the play. Do you want to emphasize the action? Do you want to emphasize the comedy? Do you want to emphasize the exploration of human subjectivity? And start cutting around those decisions to your specific vision of the play. I think it would always be a mistake just to start cutting and say, I don't like that, I don't like that. No, I think you have to start with the vision of what you want to accomplish in the 2 hours or whatever that you have, and then focus your cuts based on that. And in a play this long, it's about 1,000 lines longer than most Elizabethan plays. There's a lot that can be cut and not lose the story. A lot of just people talking brilliantly, but not necessary to drive the plot or to drive all of those themes. So choose your theme, choose your direction, and cut to that end.
I'm curious about your reading, if you have, of the book Hamlet by Maggie O'Farrell, and the hypothesis that the recent death of Shakespeare's son, who was also named Hamlet, and similar name, and if that had any impact on his writing of this particular play.
Wonderful, wonderful novel about Shakespeare's wife, and the death of their son. Shakespeare had a son named Hamnet, not Hamlet, Hamnet. And the novel sort of suggests that the writing of Hamlet is a reaction to the death of the son. And in terms of a novel, in terms of a narrative, I think this works really, really well. I am always highly reluctant to make an autobiographical reading of any work of literature. To say, oh, he wrote a sad play, he must have been sad, right? Oh, this is a funny play, he must have been in a good mood. I know sometimes this is true, but unless you've spoken to the author, I would avoid it. I mean, what's his name? Douglas, who wrote, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Funny book. Wrote it because he was depressed, right? To get out of depression. And if you look at some of the plays written before and after the death of Hamlet, I mean, Merry Wives of Windsor is written around that time. It's a goofy comedy. So I would love to make that connection, but I'm not going to. And we have to remember, too, this story, he steals the story. It's an old story of a Danish prince called Hamlet, that he steals it from. So it couldn't be entirely inspired by the death of his son. We have time for maybe one more question.
Who becomes king?
Fortinbras, unfortunately. Norwegians. I can say that because my wife is Norwegian. Okay, yeah.
In the play itself, and in most productions, the ghost is kind of ambiguous. It doesn't seem to be that in this play. This seems like very much flesh and blood.
Yeah, this is the most material. That's a really good point. This is the most material ghost I've ever seen. I've never seen it where Hamlet hugs the ghost. But he does, and I found it really, really touching. Really interesting decision that they made, and I thought the ghost was very effective. I have seen, how many ghosts have I seen? How many Hamlets have I seen? And some are very physical, and some, like you say, are off stage, or just a voice, or a shadow. I personally prefer to have a material ghost, because that's what would have been used at the time. But It can change people who are doing sort of psychoanalytical readings of this play say, well, maybe Hamlet is projecting this, and so they do productions where you don't see the old ghost. Hamlet's talking to himself. There have even been productions where Hamlet is saying, oh, talk to me, ghost. The actor jumps over here and says, I am old Hamlet, and then jumps back, right, and plays the ghost. And this is a very psychological reading of the play, which doesn't work for me. I like a good, solid meat and potatoes ghost. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming.